we're going to mix it up a bit by having a conversation now about cyber resilience and partnership. I think what was clear this morning is, for the last probably 10, 15 years, organizations have been very focused on defending the perimeter. And what we're not saying is that you shouldn't be doing that. That is absolutely key and continues to be a focus and of prime importance. But I was taking notes when Rajiv did his session. I think the numbers that he said were globally 69% of companies have had an attack. And in India, 86% in the last 12 months have experienced some kind of cyber attack. That's pretty crazy, right? And so, it validates our hypothesis of it's not if, but when an attack will happen, and you have to be ready. So what we're going to explore in this session a little bit is three things. How do you move from prevention to resilience? And again, Rajiv teed that up really nicely, talking about some of the areas there, but we're going to unpack that and get the Microsoft perspective. And then I think in every session this morning, we've kind of teed up that conversation of minimum viable company. But what does that really mean? And what are some of the key elements of that? And would love to get your perspective on that as well. And then the third area that will be, it will come through in the whole conversation, but it's absolutely key, the power of the ecosystem and of partnerships. No organization works, within their own boundaries on their own. You all work with multiple technology providers. So how do we work together in an ecosystem to give you the strength to defend and then, of course, be resilient and recover in the event of an attack? My name is Jill Macmurchy, well pronounced. Not everybody can get that Scottish name done properly, so thank you very much. Don't let the accent fool you. I am Scottish, but I do live in Australia, and I have the pleasure of leading our Asia Pacific customer office. What that really means is I have the most amazing team in the world. They are all technical experts, and they work with both customers and partners to make sure that we help you solution your environment so that you can be resilient, but also not only do we design it, but we implement it, and then we make sure that you have ongoing success as an organization and can really hit that, make sure that you're defended against those cyber attacks that we know are coming. Now, Ameen, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. You're the partner CTO at Microsoft in India. So tell us a little bit about your role.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you for having me here. I think I just want to start by saying one thing. I'm a Bangalorean by heart, right?
Love it.
And I was absolutely energized to see all the warriors be here on time, beating
That's
the
pretty
Bangalore
amazing.
traffic, right? I think they need a big round of applause for themselves, right? Because it's not easy to be on time to get that started, right? Having said that, I think my role as the partner CTO at Microsoft is predominantly to be working with the partners. We help build capability and capacity for the partners because partners are our extended arm, right? Because they carry a lot of business for us with the scale which we do, right? And one of the big charters is how can we make sure that we are equipping our partners to make sure that they are building the solutions right? And how are we making sure that we are accelerating the opportunities of our partners, customers to make them successful across for that, right? And my role spans across India and South Asia, all right? And that's what we do here.
Big job.
Yep.
So I think the phrase that Balaji used this morning was breakneck speed. Cloud adoption is still growing at breakneck speed. AI adoption is growing at breakneck speed. SaaS platform adoption similarly growing at breakneck speed. And unfortunately, the rise of attacks are also growing at breakneck speed.
Absolutely.
So when you think about it, and with the partners and customers that you talk to, how are they and how should they be thinking about security and resilience with all of those parameters and the speed at which things are changing?
I think the traditional era of having a perimeter defense is no longer valid, right? So we have gone through that with all the recent adoption of newer technologies coming in, the sophistication of attacks going through. Just securing my perimeter is not going to be working anywhere else, right? Let's be honest about that. The next one is this. If I'm not securing my perimeter, which is my next surface of attack, and that is where identity comes into the picture, right? And if you look at some of the stats, you might be seeing from the morning, the amount of attacks which identity gives you as the layer is extremely, extremely high, right? And I was hearing in the morning while we were doing some of the prereqs that attackers don't break in, they log in. And let's be honest, we've seen this happen over a couple of years. Post 2020, we saw a massive rise in all the attacks, and the sophistications of the attacks have really grown next level for us, right? It's all about how can we make sure that we are securing our identities is very, very important for us. The traditional RPOs and RTOs of disaster recovery are no longer valid, right? There's been a massive shift on all of this. So we also need to make that shift together. And how do we make sure we do that is very, very important. The other big challenge is this. There's data and the data is spread. It's no longer going to be one on-premise, one cloud provider, one colo. There is going to be a hybrid with every customer which we're looking at. Now, how do we make sure we are protecting all of our identities together? Making sure we're getting the trusted recoveries out in case if we are getting hit is very, very important. And that's where I want to bring in the partnership with Commvault together, right? Where Microsoft is equipping the customers with the right security tools, defenses, detections in place, while the recoveries and the backups come in clean with the Commvault partnership across. And this is where I think it drives a lot of value of partnership together, right? Where you're getting two sides of the story and that power being leveraged with the customers across. So that's how
I 100% agree on that. Partnerships are absolutely key now more than ever, really. Let's delve into the identity piece a bit more. So we've mentioned minimum viable company probably in all of the sessions actually so far. And it's a really key concept. And there's a few elements to it, and we'll sort of unpack those. But the first element is really, in the event of an attack, how do you ensure that your foundational services are recovered? And the very first foundational service is identity. If you cannot log in, then your company remains offline. So I'm keen to understand, I mean, you spoke a little bit about identity, but how should an organization specifically be thinking about protecting and then also recovering Active Directory? And by the way, if there's an organization that knows anything about identity, it's Microsoft, right?
absolutely.
AD is pretty much industry standard, I would say. So
Absolutely.
tell us, how do we protect AD? And then somebody logs in, how do we find them? How do we recover?
I think before I jump into that, right, we've been hearing a lot of AI from the morning.
Yeah.
Right? And there's no longer identity of a human. There's a lot of machine identities also in place today. Believe it or not, I don't know if you keep track of all of these machine identities. Prior to that, we had all these admin accounts, service accounts, which we used to look into. Things were in control. But right now, if you look at the whole identity, all of this AI is also looking and using machine identity across. That means your scale of security for identity has just increased. And the awareness of folks to make sure that this identity is used by this agent to refer this data, I don't think we have everything with us right now, right? So how do we make sure we protect all of that, right? And as Gil said, it has been one of the key identity providers for Microsoft for a long period of time, right? And that's where the power of cloud comes into to give you the Entra ID management, which is there from Microsoft, which gives you the power of conditional access, right? Which says even if you have an agent, define a condition that he can use or log in only with specific criteria being met. That means he cannot go all over the place on his own across for that. That's one. How do you make sure that the privileged identity is maintained, monitored, and logged, which is very, very important because with all the compliance, the DPDP which is coming in through logging is very important for you. And if you're not able to get those right logs in place, I'm sure we will be scrambling all over the place to get things out when we get hit, right? Plus, I think MFA has been one of the very critical areas across. Everybody started embracing. Just look at the stats of MFA usage pre and post 2020. You can see the whole graph going through. And I push for MFA even for all the social accounts for my family as well, right? Because it's very important for us. And that's where security comes in very critical for us. Now, with all of this, you got your conditional access, you got your security controls in place, right? How do you make sure that when you are doing a recovery, you have what you need is right from the identity perspective? You don't want to get something which is infected back into the same system across. Your baseline, which you need, has to be measured to the one which you recover across. And that's where Commvault comes into picture. And this story together of Microsoft and Commvault just powers the whole security systems and prevention and recovery for the customers across. Because in today's trends, we used to look at I was with cybersecurity some time back, and they used to give me a concept saying that take that you will be hit.
Yeah.
We never thought sometime back that I would even think of that. Yeah, I've put my defenses, but I would never think I'll get hit. That's how it was. But in today's case, you never know when you're going to get hit. That's more important. Plus, all of this guides with one principle, which is the zero trust principle across. It says verify explicitly every time you log in and you get that controls off across for this, right? So this is here your principal frameworks of zero trust security, the cloud controls of Microsoft and the Entra ID, and also the recovery and the capabilities of clean room and immutable storage come into picture for this.
That's great. So you mentioned clean room and the whole recovery process. So let's kind of rewind to identity. So there's been an attack. We've managed to recover. We've managed to gain access back into the environment. So that's step one. And obviously, I'm making it sound like it's easy, but it's not.
Yeah.
But together, Microsoft and Commvault can get that to happen. So the next step, really, assuming that you've kind of done all the pre-work, is to understand what your minimum viable company is. So what are the key systems that you need to have back up and running in order for your organization to operate? So we've layered in identity. We've got that. We got access. Next thing, probably communication. You know, Microsoft Teams is a great one, email, etc. So again, let's assume we get communication back up and running. The next piece in that equation is how do you get the rest of your environment back up again? So if you've gone through the process of mapping out your minimum viable company, you'll have an understanding of what are the key applications that you need in order to get your business, let's call it 80% operational. And again, to your point, making sure that you've got those clean, immutable copies and, doing the testing is absolutely key. So as you think about minimum viable company and how we play in that space together, what are some of the key areas that you think an organization really needs to be focusing in on to make sure that each step of that process has been tackled?
So I think one of the key things of minimal viable company is how can you get your base infrastructure in place to get operational, right? That's very, very important. And when you look at all of the DR drills which we do, these are fancy things. And I'll give you an example is maybe a decade back, there used to be DR drills, but the real drills were most namesake. A small part would be recovered and you would sign off saying your drills are done across. That's not the case today, right? So the case here is how can you make sure that I get all of my data, which is important for me to get operational at the fastest time is very, very important. And what is that base which I need, which is the minimum viable thing for us to make sure that my business operations get in place is very, very important for us. And to do that, that's where the cloud capabilities come in with Defender for Cloud, which basically gives you the whole vulnerability scanning even while you are recovering your data back, right? Making sure that you are getting clean copies in place while you're doing that. That's number one. Number two, all of this RPO and RTO kicks in, everybody is in a rush. How do you make sure your configurations, which you're setting at that point of time, is right, is also equally important for the customer across so that he is doing the right things and not rushing things across to get that going. Along with that, while you're doing this, the SIM capabilities of Sentinel come into picture, right? Which gives you the whole analysis of the system and the logs coming into for you, where you can tell that things are being put, set right from all the perspectives to make sure your business gets operational as soon as possible across. And in this, that's where companies basically achieve a faster RPO and RTO for their system. That's
yeah, absolutely. Just figured a thought in my mind. So, I mean, DR, it's still a thing, right? I mean, disasters still happen. So we're not saying don't do disaster recovery, but I think it was a practice that, and still is a practice that is quite well documented, and it's related in some form of certainty, right?
Yes.
But I think the one thing about DR that you just made me think about is we've been testing DR in our organizations. We know, like, we've got, I mean, maybe it only happens once a year. It's pretty common practice. So why, when it comes to cyber attacks, do we not think as much about how we test for those scenarios? It's interesting, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I mean, I think it's probably just because it's a really difficult problem. It's the unknown unknowns. You don't know what's going to happen.
It's going to be as we said, right? It's going to be tough for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it just ups your game of preparedness once you keep doing that, right? Because once you do it, the next time you learn from it, the third time you're already improving on it, and fourth time you master it and become perfection on that. So that's the whole thing, is make sure you will get hit. So by the time you're there, your preparedness should be on par to make sure your base infrastructure of your minimum viable company is up and running and you're back into business fast.
Be prepared, do lots of testing.
Yes.
And I think, again, through most of the sessions this morning, you'll have heard us talking about clean room. The organizations that we work with that have been really successful in doing that iterative testing have set up the ability to test their recoverability using clean room. And that's a game changer. So with DR, you're basically, you've got a replica of your organization. That is no longer possible. And so the ability to spin up a clean room in Azure,
yes,
do the testing, and then take it down again and do that as many times as you need becomes an absolutely critical capability. I mean, we work very closely together. Around the world, we got hundreds, if not thousands, of common customers and partners. Are there any that come to mind in India where you think, Microsoft, Commvault, and this organization have really got a great solution in place?
I think one name resonates for me is Persistent, right? And the reason is because Persistent is both a customer as well as a partner for Microsoft. Like how we have Commvault, Persistent is also partner for Microsoft across. And for partners, being a customer zero is very important because you need to adapt the technology yourself before you go ahead and propose it to any of your customers across. And Persistent has been a classic case of adapting all of the technology with Commvault to make sure that they are able to achieve a faster RPO and RTO, build resiliency for themselves. Because when you do that, you become a trusted advisor for the customer. And that's when it brings the confidence for the customers to make sure that they're able to adapt all of this. Now, one of the biggest challenges for them was a massive landscape, and two was AI, right? And how do you make sure they would leverage both the power of Microsoft and Commvault together to make sure they are bringing in that resiliency as a partner and customer in place for them to achieve more trust. That's where it is. I think that's a very classic case study for us as well.
It's a fantastic case study. Balaji mentioned it this morning. And like with Microsoft, Persistent's a customer and a partner. That makes it extremely powerful because they get to test the technology and then help other organizations implement it. I did also capture some of the numbers that Balaji spoke about this morning. So I think the recovery time was 66% faster than the original target, which is, again, very powerful in the world where something bad happens. The RPO was 22 minutes. So imagine in the event that something happens, if you could tell your CEO, CTO, and the board that you can recover in 22 minutes.
That's fantastic.
I think they're going to sleep better at night.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Trust me. I think the CISO is going to have a good night's sleep with all of that, because if you look at the traditional RPOs and RTOs, right, they've always been in days, practically in days, not even in hours, right? We talk hours, but the moment you do it practically, you run into days. If you can run this within a couple of hours, I think that's really fantastic.
It's a game changer. And again, you just made me think of a customer that we work with in Australia. And it's an interesting one because they're a financial institution, but it wasn't a cyber attack. It was something different, not a Microsoft customer. They actually lost their entire cloud tenancy, both their production and their dev test environment, totally unrecoverable. They were in a bit of a spot. Now, the good news is they had an air-gapped immutable copy backup in Commvault. Had they not had that, then the world would have been a very different place for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But they could not recover in 22 minutes. And the reason being, they had the foresight to do the air-gap copy, but they hadn't tested.
That's very, very important, right? It's all about making sure you have the right backup, making sure you're testing the backups, And when you're testing the backups, always have a baseline to test.
Yeah.
Right? And making sure that you are improving on that every time you do that, that's the key.
100%. If that's one lesson to be learned, test. And by the way, no organization has this perfect. But if you are not getting ready to set yourselves up to think about what your minimum viable company is and to start to build out those building blocks and to start to test, then, if the worst happens, you could be in a pretty tricky spot. So even if you haven't started, which is not uncommon, I would really encourage you to start thinking about that today. I mean, a fascinating conversation. We've covered a lot of different topics here.
Absolutely.
So we know we need to move from prevention into really how do we build a resilient organization? And the keys to that are identity,
yes,
then getting your air gap copy, setting up a clean room so that you can test the recovery to make sure that you're confident about recovering and you can be resilient. Then we sort of unpack that minimum viable company concept a little more. We're happy to talk about it in more detail. There's a Microsoft booth outside.
Yeah,
You'll be hanging around.
Yeah, I'm going to hang around there for some more time. Good to catch up.
I think maybe most importantly is really the role of partnerships. And even when we talked about persistent, again, partnership and a customer for us both.
Yep.
The role of building out your ecosystem and very strong partnerships with the technology providers that you have is absolutely key. So, I mean, as we wrap up, tell me what's the one thing that everyone in this room should be thinking about doing when they go back to work? Hopefully not this afternoon because everyone's going to stick around and have a chat and a drink.
Yep.
But when they go back tomorrow, what's the one thing?
I think I just want to give this one thought to everyone, saying that the threats are evolving. Let's be honest about that. And the amount of sophistication in the threats are just increasing day by day. Are we prepared to handle all of those? I don't think we are, right? But at least get started immediately to make sure that you have some immutable backups which are there for you, which is very, very important, right? Making sure that you have them air gap, right? Completely isolated, separated, because you don't want to restore infection back in and start working and getting that going. How fast can you do that? Very, very important. And the last one, when you're recovering, is it trustworthy? That's the last thing I just want to leave you with, right? So with these thoughts, I think I want to end an excellent conversation.
Thank you very much for your time and your partnership. Really appreciate it.
Likewise.
We'll be around throughout the day, so please come and find us. Happy to chat further. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Ameen.
Thanks so much. It's nice having a conversation.